Right now, we are covering breaking news in Licking County. In just a few minutes, we expect to learn the verdict for the semi-truck driver accused of causing a deadly bus crash on I-70. Thanks for joining us on 10 TV Plus. I'm Angela Ann. So let's get you up to speed on this case. Jacob McDonald, the semi-driver, is facing 26 charges, 6 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 9 counts of vehicular assault, and 11 counts of assault. Now, he has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He's charged because his semi-truck crashed into the back of a charter bus on I-70 in Licking County that killed 3 Tuscarawas Valley students and 3 chaperones. This happened in November of 2023. 18 others were hurt in this crash. 5 vehicles we know were involved, and we also know the group of 54 students were on their way to Columbus for a band conference where they were supposed to perform. Here are the 6 people who died in that crash. The students were 15-year-old Caitlin Owens, 18-year-old Wyatt Mosley, and 18-year-old Jeffrey Morrell. The chaperones were 56-year-old Dave Kennett, 39-year-old Christy Gaynor, and 45-year-old Shannon Wakefield. Now, last week, Jacob McDonald's bench trial began, and it lasted 3 days before both sides finished their arguments. Now it is up to the judge to decide the verdict, and we do have team coverage this afternoon of this ruling that is expected in just minutes. 10 TV's Lacey Crisp is inside that courtroom waiting for the judge to announce the verdict, and that hearing again scheduled to begin at 1 o'clock this afternoon. We also have 10 TV's Kevin Landers. He is in an overflow room right now where many of these victims' families are sitting and waiting as well. So Kevin, good afternoon to you as well. I know that this is a moment these families have been anticipating. What are you seeing and really feeling inside that room?
Yeah, we're just outside the overflow room, which is about 10 feet from the courtroom. And as you can see inside, there are people here. Many of them are connected to this crash. Many of the people who are here are wearing T-shirts with all 6 victims' faces on them, as well as buttons that have the number 6 on them in memoriam of those who lost their lives. I can tell you that everybody here is very quiet. They're all anticipating this verdict. Unknown what's going to happen, but they are all very hopeful. There was a prayer service just moments ago inside this room behind me as they prayed for a verdict in this case. We'll be here outside the courtroom the moment that verdict comes in, and we'll be hearing from those people as they leave this room. I can tell you right now, the courtroom is packed. It is a very small courtroom. Many of the people who are here who lost their loved ones are in that courtroom right now. And again, we'll bring that to you, their reactions live when it happens. Angela, back to you.
Kevin, before we let you go, you know, this was such a big story, and we were covering this when it happened almost 2 years ago in November along I-70. Can you refresh for people who are watching right now on 10 TV Plus, really what's at the crux of this trial, which is whether or not that semi-truck driver who was going 70 miles an hour, whether or not he was looking at his phone at the time of the crash?
Yeah, and that's the question. As you may remember, that cell phone was destroyed in the crash, and the question was he on his cell phone while this crash was happening? And that's what this judge is going to have to weigh, whether or not there was any evidence at all that proves that. At this point, it's an unknown, it appears. So we're going to have to wait and see whether or not this truck driver was actually on his phone. Now, he did have some violations before this crash involving speed. So we'll have to see if that plays into that at all. But at this point, I think a lot of people here don't know how this is going to come down because the question was he distracted when this crash happened? And at this point, as you mentioned, this is a bench trial, not a jury trial. So it's up to the judge to decipher all of this information and then come down with a verdict.
And I know we talk with a lot of defense attorneys about why his attorney decided to go with a bench trial versus a jury trial. The emotions, Kevin, surrounding this, and I'm sure you're seeing it right now with that overflow room, certainly very intense.
Yeah, I can tell you that everybody here is very, very solemn. I think you can obviously feel for these families, right? They've been waiting something like 183 days since this crash happened, waiting for a verdict, trying to get some justice. And again, we're all waiting for this 1 o'clock verdict to come down to see what exactly the judge finally decides.
All right. Well, Kevin Landers, we appreciate you being there as part of our team coverage this afternoon. Again, this is on the Licking County deadly bus crash that took the lives of 6 people from the Tuscarawas Valley community. We also mentioned that we have Lacey Crisp right now inside that courtroom, and we just saw people stand. We want to give you a live look right now where this judge is now walking in to the courtroom to read the verdict. Listen in.
As you all know, I am about to announce the verdicts as a result of the bench trial that took place last week. Before I do that, let me just say that this is an incredibly difficult case. Not just because of the catastrophe that happened or who it happened to, but also because of the conflicting evidence and the gradations of responsibility that the law imposes. Let me just briefly discuss the counts. 26 counts in total. Counts 1 through 6 charge the defendant with aggravated vehicular homicide with respect to each of the 6 fatalities. Those counts charge the defendant with recklessly operating a motor vehicle causing the death of another person. Counts 7 through 15 charge the defendant with vehicular assault. In each of those counts, the defendant is charged with causing serious physical harm to another person as a result of recklessly operating a motor vehicle. Counts 16 through 20 all charge the defendant with assault. These charges are based on the assertion that the defendant knowingly caused physical harm to another person. You know, this job gives me the opportunity to recognize how at various points in our life, we're all just a few feet or a few seconds away from a disaster. And that's what happened here. The facts of the case are largely undisputed. November 14, 2023, between 8:47 a.m. and 8:48 a.m., a fatal crash involving 5 vehicles occurred on Interstate 70, approximately 0.2 of a mile west of milepost 119 here in Licking County. At the time of that collision, traffic had slowed due to a crash that had occurred approximately 1.5 miles ahead. There's no dispute in this case that the 2019 Freightliner driven by the defendant struck the rear of the vehicle in front of it. That vehicle was pushed into the rear of the vehicle in front of it, and so on. Counts 1 through 6 and 7 through 15 all allege that the defendant acted recklessly in his operation of his vehicle, and that reckless operation caused the death, as alleged in counts 1 through 6, or the serious physical injury, as alleged in counts 7 through 15. Recklessness is defined in Ohio law as follows. A person acts recklessly when, with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that the person's conduct is likely to cause a certain result or is likely to be of a certain nature. A person is reckless with respect to circumstances when, with heedless indifference to the consequences, the person disregards a substantial and unjustifiable risk that such circumstances are likely to exist. Negligence is defined as follows. A person acts negligently when, because of a substantial lapse from due care, the person fails to perceive or avoid a risk that the person's conduct may cause a certain result or be of a certain nature. A person is negligent with respect to circumstances when, because of a substantial lapse from due care, the person fails to perceive or avoid a risk that such circumstances may exist. I find that Mr. McDonald is criminally responsible for this accident, this collision. However, I find that the state has failed to establish beyond a reasonable doubt the element of recklessness. There was a lot of argument and evidence centered around the data from the defendant's cell phone. Frankly, I did not find the evidence regarding the data from the cell phone to be convincing. Because I find that the state has failed to meet the element of recklessness, I'm going to enter a not guilty verdict on counts 1 through 6 and 7 through 15. However, I will enter guilty verdicts on the lesser included offenses to counts 1 through 6, which are vehicular homicide, violation of revised code section 2903.06 A3A, which is based on his negligent operation of the vehicle. Count 7 through 15, frankly, they're based on a higher mens rea or mental element than even recklessly. And because I find the state has failed to establish the element of recklessness, the evidence is insufficient to establish that he knowingly did this. All right, I anticipate that the parties would prefer that sentencing be scheduled at a later time in order to make sure we comply with Marcy's law. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, then I'll schedule sentencing at a later time. Bond is revoked. Do counsel have anything further at this point?
Yes, Your Honor, just for clarification, the vehicular assault charges are 9 counts of those are also, you're finding negligent on them, those charges, as well as...
I find that he acted negligently at least, but are you suggesting there's a lesser included offense based on negligent operation and physical harm?
I'm just asking if the court is making that finding on... No, I'm not. I'm just asking...
Okay, yeah, it's not guilty then on counts 16 through 26.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you.
So you have just heard the verdict handed down by Judge David Branstool in the Licking County Court of Common Pleas against Jacob McDonald, the semi-truck driver responsible for that deadly bus crash in Licking County. Quite an emotional moment, and this is what the judge said. Out of the 26 counts, he said he does find Jacob McDonald criminally responsible, but the state, according to the judge, failed to establish beyond reasonable doubt the act of recklessness, which is what the charges had to be. Therefore, he said he was finding him a not guilty on counts 1 through 6 and 7 through 15. Those involve the reckless operation of a motor vehicle that led to the injury or deaths of persons. However, the judge also said on separate counts, and now mind you, there were 26, so quite a lot to get through here, but he did find for counts 1 through 6 guilty on the vehicular homicide, those counts. So right now, you heard the prosecution ask the judge, excuse me, to clarify again which counts were guilty and which ones were not guilty. You also heard a collective gasp in the courtroom. We could see families holding hands in that overflow room. You could hear people, some crying. Let's get to Lacey Crisp right now, who was in that courtroom when that verdict
What I
came
can
down.
tell you is this. I want to thank the Ohio State Highway Patrol, the hard work that they did, especially Sergeant Trevor Jasper, Trooper James Coughlin, also Trooper Sean Grimm. The patrol's work in this case was fantastic. I'd also like to thank the people from Tusky Valley who have suffered an absolute disaster on November 14th. The verdict is the judge's. The verdict belongs to the judge. We disagree.
If the phone had not been destroyed, would that have changed things?
Well, there obviously be more evidence, but the phone is independent of whether or not he was reckless. Again, that was our opinion. That's what we outlined, that there was 3 different ways that we believe that he was reckless. And so, again, we disagree with the judge's ruling. That's the judge's province to do that. And we believe we presented sufficient evidence for convictions on all charges.
Do you have any regrets in how you presented your case?
No.
What does this do for the families who were thinking they would get more out of this than misdemeanor charges?
Realistically, our system is one based on law and based on facts. Juries decide cases, and in the absence of juries at the election of the defense, they can request a bench trial. That is our system. We respect the decision of the court. That is our system.
This has been a long process for the families. I know you've been in constant contact with them for the last year and a half, pretty much. What conversations will you have with them leading up to sentencing?
The conversations that I would have with them is something that I probably will not discuss with the media. And just because, again, they suffered a tremendous loss. It's an incalculable loss. And, unfortunately, the system didn't serve him in this particular case.
Why do you think it was reckless?
You were sitting through the same trial I was.
I was not.
No? I would refer you to my closing arguments. I would refer you to the evidence we presented. We disagree.
Reckless because there was evidence that he was on his phone, reckless because he didn't slow down, reckless because he was speeding.
Well, I think
How
I
would you sum
covered.
it up?
I think I covered that in my closing.
I get that,
I think.
I wasn't here, so I'm just trying to look for a summation.
Well, I don't know that I can in 10 seconds, but the best I could probably do is tell you that if you close your eyes for 7 seconds, and you're carrying 50,000 pounds of weight down a road, moving 105 feet a second, and you don't see anything in front of you, so much so that when a picture is taken of you, when you're not expecting it by a witness and you have your hands up in the air and you're completely oblivious to what happened, yeah, you're probably reckless. So we disagree.
We could hear the family's reaction to the verdict, but on a personal level, I'm wondering how you feel.
I don't feel good. I mean, this is one of the consequences of all trials. So we accept the court's decision in this matter, and this is the system that we have.
Did they set a sentencing date?
Not yet.
Sir, some of us were in the hallway when you began this media gaggle. What was your initial reaction to your overall reaction to the verdict today?
Disappointing.
Is this closure for families, or what do you do now?
I don't think that when you bury 6 people and you have a number of other people who have suffered serious harm, life-changing injuries, that there's going to be closure. I don't think that any verdict in this court would bring closure to the severity of loss that these people have suffered. I think at the end of the day, the process itself is part of the healing, but it's not the conclusion of the healing. It's just you can't sum up their loss in any words.
Do you think there's one thing in particular that hurt the case, that prevented the guilty on the felony version?
Every case comes down to the weighing of the evidence either by a jury or by a judge. And the verdict of every case is decided by that. And so in this particular case,
the judge, felt that the evidence wasn't sufficient to sustain that standard. In the position that he was in, that's his prerogative to do.
Spell your name for us, please.
Murphy is the last name. What I will say this about Judge Branstool, I've known him for 8 years. He's a good man. I think he's a man of integrity, and I think he's fair. I think he's a fair judge. I think he's a good judge.
And first name? We're from Cleveland. That's why I don't know.
Oh, first name is Clifford, Clifford.
County prosecutor or prosecutor?
Assistant prosecutor.
Okay, thank you so much.
So,
Thanks.
thank you.
Sir. Thank you.
So you're listening to Chief Felony Prosecutor of Licking County, Clifford Murphy there. Basically, he was asked, how does he personally feel about the verdict that he just heard? He said, I don't feel good. Our team coverage now continues with 10 TV's Kevin Landers. And Kevin, you're standing by with the defense attorney for Jacob McDonald.
Yeah, this is Craig Brigden, who represents Jacob McDonald. And Chris, when you heard the verdict today, was a mixed bag. Why do you think the judge didn't see reckless homicide as a guilty verdict in this case?
Well, I mean, he read the definitions. I believe the definition of negligence fit this. And there's a reason we tried this case to the bench. The difference between recklessness and negligence, there's a finite line within the law as applicable to the facts. So Judge Branstool's been a judge for 20 plus years. He was a defense attorney for 10 years prior to that. He's a super smart guy and a fair judge. So we tried it to the bench because we wanted him to make that interpretation.
How key was it, in your opinion, that the cell phone was destroyed in this case in ways to help your client?
Well, with the cell phone being destroyed, it's just simply we don't know what the data is. So could it help or hurt? Who knows? We don't know what the data is. Jacob can't remember the last 5 to 6 minutes before impact, so we really have no idea what the data is.
You don't believe he was on his cell phone at the time of the crash?
There's no evidence that would prove that conclusively. We have data transfers, but as you saw from the trial, we had a lot of experts come in there. AT&T themselves can't tell us what the data is, so we really don't know what the data is.
When you deal with a case like this with so much emotion, obviously, what's the message you have to the families who lost their lives in this crash?
Well, nobody here wins. It's absolutely devastating. I have a 13 and 14-year-old. The amount of impact that this has on them is tragic. So, we respect that. We respect the families as well.
Sentencing is still a ways away. What's your strategy going forward with sentencing? What will we be asking the judge for?
Well, in Ohio, you can't be sentenced any longer than 18 months of local incarceration for misdemeanors. I would anticipate it'll reach that limit. How it gets carved up on the different charges, I'm uncertain, but I would anticipate the 18-month local incarceration.
Chris Burchin, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
So we're out here in the hallway as we just get the reactions from everybody here who is involved in the case. Again, when that verdict was read, a member of the family burst into the door, verbally upset, and he was escorted out into the hallway. The family has been in the courtroom, and we will await them as they make their way out. We are told that members of the family will be speaking shortly after this verdict. Angela, back to you.
All right, Kevin Landers reporting live for us right outside the Licking County courtroom. You were just listening to the defense attorney there of Jacob McDonald talking about the verdict. The one thing he said is no one wins in this case, but he did say that the reason they went with that bench trial is because there is a fine line between the difference of negligence and recklessness. And knowing the judge, David Branstool, and in his words, a very smart man, he said he wanted the judge, not a jury, to make that interpretation. It does appear that that is exactly what the judge said, where he outlined the definition of recklessness in the state of Ohio and said that Jacob McDonald was not guilty for the charges related to the recklessness of the deaths of the 6 people, but he was negligent. And so therefore, there will be a sentencing taking place for the guilty portion of those charges that were part of this trial. A lot to get to. And of course, we're covering this all on 10tv.com and here on 10TV Plus. I do want to send things back over to Lacey Crisp. She has been following this story from the very beginning, and she is talking right now, again, I'm told, with some more attorneys. So I'm going to get with Lacey in just a second. But just to recap again, there you see Chris Brigden talking again. He is the defense attorney. If we can we listen in just again to hear what he has to say?
The best possible defense, and we did our job the best that I possibly could. So,
Were you shocked to hear the judge's announcement verdict?
I wouldn't say shocked. No. Again, Judge Branstool is, an incredibly smart guy. He's been a judge a long time. He's very fair, and that's why strategically we tried this to the bench. We wanted him to make that determination. I felt strongly that the negligence fit, the definition of it, as opposed to recklessness. Reckless is a very high standard. So that's why we strategically tried it to the bench.
And for those of us who aren't attorneys, can you explain the verdict for us?
Yeah, so the negligence verdict means that the lesser included of, it's still vehicular homicide, but it's a lesser included, which is the misdemeanor level, which is punishable by a maximum of 6 months of local incarceration or up to a $1,000 fine. At a felony level, if the reckless standard had been met, then it's a felony in the 3rd degree, which is punishable by a maximum of 36 months in prison and up to a $5,000 fine for each count. So really it was night and day. I can't remember exactly, but I think 31 years, I think, was the maximum total for all the counts. And then, as I stated previously, regardless of the accounts on the misdemeanor, there's a 18-month cap on local incarceration. So,
And you think he'll get the 18?
I would anticipate it. Obviously, we'll, argue for something else, but I would anticipate it.
Does that include time served?
It does, yes. He's been in for a little over 10 months at this point.
So if Judge Branstool sentenced him to 18 months, he could be out in about a year.
Probably another 7 months, somewhere in there. Yeah, 7 to 8 months.
I'm not sure if you're representing Mr. McDonald in the civil trials, but how do you think this will impact those litigations?
I don't represent him in that, and it's really not my forte, so I wouldn't comment on the civil trial.
How was your client, where was his mindset throughout the trial last week?
I think he's devastated. In all my interactions with him, he regardless of what today's outcome is, I think that he personally knows that he was a proximate cause of these deaths and injuries, and I think it's devastated him personally. So I think that he showed, during the trial, I think he had his head down a lot, and I think he just hearing the facts, took a toll on him.
Why did you decide not to call him to the witness stand?
Well, he didn't remember the last, I think it was about 5 to 6 minutes. So, and that's the crucial time period. So there's really, unfortunately, nothing he could offer us, other than that morning, which really wasn't disputed, that he'd gotten his truck at a certain time, and so there was really no benefit to that.
Does he plan to give a statement at sentencing, say anything to the victims' families?
It's undetermined at this point.
Everybody good? Thank you so much.
All right.
Can you say your name? I'm sorry.
So you've just heard again from the defense attorney, Chris Brigden, of Jacob McDonald, the semi-truck driver that was at the center of this deadly bus crash in the trial that took place last week. Again, 26 counts in all that he was charged with. Some were felonies, some were misdemeanors. And in the end, it looks like the judge, David Branstool, decided to his verdict as not guilty for the more serious charges that were felonies that would have meant up to 31 years in prison. Those involved the charge related to reckless operation of a vehicle. But instead, the judge said he was guilty of negligent, basically saying that he was negligent in the driving, but those are lesser charges. and misdemeanors. And therefore, there is a cap in the state of Ohio of 18 months. And that includes time served. And as you heard, our reporter Lacey Crisp ask the defense attorney, does that include how much time? And he's already spent 10 months. But he also said that the semi-truck driver was devastated. Now, we also have Kevin Landers, who is waiting outside the overflow room where many of the families of the victims were listening in for that verdict. We'll get to him in just a minute. But one thing that Kevin did say was when the first not guilty verdict came down, a member of the family came into that room visibly upset and had to be escorted. You're looking now at families leaving that room. You can tell by the looks on their faces, very solemn, very sober day for these families. A lot of them likely trying to figure out what this verdict really means for the 6 families who suffered such great loss on that day back in November of 2023. So to give you a recap, this is the deadly bus crash that happened on I-70. Many of you may remember it well. In November of 2023, a charter bus carrying 54 students from the Tuscarawas Valley Band on their way to Columbus to perform when they were hit from behind by a semi-truck. That truck driven by Jacob McDonald. 5 vehicles in all involved. The Highway Patrol says based on its investigation, McDonald did not slow down, was driving 70 miles per hour when he literally drove over a vehicle and then into the back of that charter bus. Other cars also involved in this, but in all, 6 people died, 3 of them students, 3 others chaperones, and a teacher from Tuscarawas Valley. So again, you're looking live at the overflow room as more families leave that overflow room, many of them clearly not wanting to speak to media. Kevin Landers is there, and he was there as many of these families watched that verdict come down. So again, you're looking at the charges that Jacob McDonald is now guilty of vehicular homicide, which is the negligent part of the charges that he is facing. So again, he had 26 charges in all. Some were related to reckless operation of a motor vehicle, and then some related to negligence. And that is what the judge found him guilty of. He basically said, the judge, recklessness is defined in Ohio law when a person does act recklessly and disregards substantial and justifiable risk of conduct to cause a result of a certain nature. But again, the judge found that McDonald was not guilty on those. However, he was negligent. And he did say that while McDonald was criminally responsible, and that's an important word because there are also more civil lawsuits filed in this, he did say that the state failed to establish beyond a reasonable doubt the act of recklessness. So let's get to Lacey Crisp now. And Lacey, you sat through that entire trial. It does sound like there was a very fine line that was being debated here between the prosecution and the defense.
You know, and that's what the defense attorney knew going into this trial. That is why he asked for a bench trial instead of a jury trial, because a judge thoroughly understands the law and has to base his verdict off the law when sometimes juries can be swayed by the emotion of 6 people who were killed in this crash, 3 of those just students, teenagers. And so Judge Branstool made his decision today. He said in his opening remarks how tough of a decision this was for him personally. He knows the emotions of this case, but he has to decide based on law. And what Judge Branstool said was it came down to the evidence or lack thereof, conflicting evidence about Jacob McDonald's cell phone. Now, that cell phone was burned up in the crash, so it was never recovered. However, they were able to get the data from his phone, but AT&T will not give the prosecutors, will not give the defense attorney the exact data that was used at the time of the crash. crash or the minutes leading up to the crash. We just know about 40 megabytes of data were coming and going from his phone in the minutes leading up to the crash. But the defense attorney argued that that doesn't mean it was in McDonald's hand, and that that's why he ruled that it was not reckless. And the judge obviously agreed with the defense in this case. Some of those victims' families have been here. They've had a long haul. Kevin
Silence,
is
cries,
with them now.
And just
Yeah,
don't
let's listen in.
understand how, I mean, it's a misdemeanor. I was told it's a misdemeanor and he can walk away soon from jail. So our families aren't justified. You know, what I can say is if someone can count 7 seconds right now, that is how much time, no matter what he was doing, to stop. So count 7 seconds. That's a long time. That's a long time, no matter what you're doing. If you're looking out your window, to be able to apply a brake, to be able to go off into the side, a median, but going, what they said, 72 to 75 to a vehicle into another bus, that's a long time. And I mean, even though it was proven he was on his phone, but obviously the judge did not feel that. So
How is Bryn doing, and can you walk us through her status?
yeah,
She's getting ready to graduate.
yeah, Bryn is doing great. She actually she was the only student testifying, so she was on the first day at the 30-minute mark, and I was also to testify, so I was not there with her. I was back in the testifying room for 2 days, so I never even got to see anything until Wednesday when there was a break. But yeah, she is a senior. She wanted to be here, but she has testing all week, AP testing. Last night was a spring concert, and she's doing great. I mean, emotionally, this last week, she just doesn't realize it was such innocence. On the way home, she's like, "Mom, do you know that they were lying in court?" And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Mom, I know they're lying, and there's a Bible in there." And it just kind of broke my heart. I'm like, "It's okay." She's like, "I had to put my hand up and I had to say an oath on the Bible, and I told the truth." And I'm like, keep telling the truth, you know? So, I mean, she's so positive, and she graduates on June 1st. And her party's on I call it the celebration, on June 8th. And then she's going to Kent State for her goal is to be a nurse anesthetist. So
You came here to get justice. Do you feel justice was denied today?
100%. And I'm just talking on the behalf of myself. I cannot talk on the rest of the families, but I feel like and the way Bryn presents herself, and the strength Bryn has, I found the strength in myself to be able to talk to you guys today. So no, justice was not served.
If you can you describe the pain in that room when the verdict came down?
Silence, cries, hurt, anger.
Everyone expected felony convictions and for him to go to prison, as that was the expectation coming in?
Expectation is hard to say, but we were definitely thinking that it would be recklessness, not negligence. And then in 4 to 6 weeks would be the victim impact statements, which would be the sentencing. But now with it being negligence and not recklessness, he can go home. I mean, I don't know if he has a driver's license. I don't know if he still has a CDL. I don't know what's going to happen after that.
If you could speak to Mr. McDonald, what would you want to say to him?
Can you please just be honest and say what you did that day and that you're sorry? You know, nobody wakes up, some people, but my daughter said the same thing. Nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to go kill 6 people and injure and hurt another 50 plus. But on the other hand, he did. And so just saying something out loud and just having a statement at all from the heart to the families, I think would be remarkable. But there's been not one sentence that we've heard from him, eye contact, nothing.
When you talk about closure, how can the families, I mean, obviously, the 6 lives that were lost will never be back. You'll never get that. But can families ever find closure, especially after this verdict?
I don't think so. Last week, I had a lot of high hopes. I felt like a lot of things were said from the state highway, just different, and the efforts that were made to save every single one of the kiddos, the chaperones. I mean, you heard it, but closure is not in the words right now. I don't think.
Oh, do you guys move forward?
We have to. We're a school district. We have band kids. We're families. We work. We've taken off so much time from work. We have to. I mean, there's no choice.
Would a harsher verdict have gotten you closer to closure?
I think so. I think the verdict of recklessness would have, I guess, I hate to say it, but proven a point, especially with fellow semi-truck drivers. I mean, my husband drives a semi. Josh, that saved Bryn's life, drives a semi, and neither of them are okay with what he did. So, I mean, recklessness would have been what we needed, and then the sentencing is just different, you know, but
They'll still be able to make statements, though.
they'll be able to make, yeah. So impact statements will be at the time of sentencing.
Thank you, Danielle.
Is there anything else you'd want to say that we haven't touched on about today?
No, it's in God's hands. We prayed before. That's all we can do. Support each other, stay positive, and just continue to pray for our families and our friends and our communities. So.
Do you think that that prayer and that togetherness is going to kind of help to move the Tuscarawas Valley family forward?
Yeah, I mean, we pray a lot, and we have to stick together. We're a community. So. Thank you.
Thank you.
So you were just listening to a victim family speaking right outside the courtroom about this verdict. Possibly the most powerful part of what she was telling the media was the fact that she asked everyone to count for 7 seconds. That is how long the evidence showed that Jacob McDonald was not watching the road at 70 miles per hour. That's the length of almost 2 football fields. And she says she felt justice was denied today. And describing the emotion in the room when they first heard the judge's verdict, she said you could feel the pain in the room. There was silence, crying, hurt, and anger. So again, Jacob McDonald, the semi-truck driver responsible for that deadly bus crash along I-70 back in November of 2023, was found guilty of 6 counts of vehicular homicide. Now, those are misdemeanor counts because they were counts related to negligence, which is a misdemeanor, not the felony of recklessness. And in the state of Ohio, there is a definitive line of a difference between the two. Recklessness signifies a conscious disregard for a known risk. That is what the families wanted. However, the judge said the state failed to prove without a reasonable doubt that there was reckless behavior. They failed to establish beyond the reasonable doubt the act of recklessness. So therefore, the judge said he was guilty instead of negligence, which implies a failure to simply meet a reasonable standard of care. Despite all this, in the end, 6 families are still grieving even more tonight. As you heard, one of them saying they did not feel like they got justice. But the defense attorney for Jacob McDonald did say that the semi-truck driver was devastated by the accident. The family, however, feels they have yet to hear from him. We will see whether during sentencing we do get to hear from Jacob McDonald. The defense attorney said he chose specifically not to put him on the stand during the trial because he wanted the judge simply to interpret what the law stated. And basically, we will find out whether or not Jacob McDonald will be sentenced to the cap of 18 months on those lesser misdemeanor charges. We do have team coverage of this verdict that came down just shortly 40 minutes ago. You'll find all of this on 10tv.com, but we will also have it on 10 TV beginning at 4 today. We appreciate you joining us for this special edition of 10 TV Plus. We'll see you later.